Yeah, let's just start by, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. We've got an hour blocked out today. Hopefully we can run to time to discuss everything digital design 2024. So not nearly long enough, but we will give it our best shot. So there's going to be about a 45-minute discussion with the panel on some key topics, and then there'll be some time for a Q&A at the end. So if you do have some questions for our speakers, if you can pop them in the chat function on the Teams app through the webinar, and I'll do my best to get them answered for you. But before I introduce the panel, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and 3Search. So 3Search are one of, if not the most specialist recruitment agencies in the UK, with a focus on marketing and digital roles across the UK and the US. And I was brought in as part of their digital growth plans to launch our design recruitment offering across UX, UI, and product design. For those of you that don't know me so well, I have over a decade of experience recruiting in this space, and I'm extremely proud to have placed hundreds of digital designers into leading businesses in the UK. And some of those people are actually speaking and in attendance today, which is really humbling. But building this for 3Search, I want to leverage the network I have to connect people so that we can all share knowledge and ideas in the space. Yes, of course, first and foremost, I'm a recruiter, which is a bit of a dirty word in certain circles. So I also want to engage with my community outside of just finding people jobs, because the insight I get from speaking to you all inevitably makes me a better, more insightful consultant. And this will be the first, I hope, of many webinars and events in digital design that can benefit and support people's careers. So down to business, the reason we're all here. I just want to thank our panel for taking the time today to speak with us. I appreciate how busy work and life can be. So I am extremely grateful for this hour of everyone's time. The journeys they've all been on and the combined experience they have should give us an amazing platform for discussion today. So we've got Perri, she's the Director of UX and Digital Design at Legends. We have Omar, who's the Director of Product and UX at Burberry, and Ollie, who's the Director of Product Design at Bumble. I'm just going to link back now. Ollie is now spotlighted, so that's perfect. We all know who we are, because actually, Ollie, I think you're going to kick us off. First item on the agenda. So UX, UI, product design, all of the evolution of titles, certainly over the last decade that I've been doing this, is monumental. And what does that mean in terms of skill set and upskilling? Ollie, I wonder if you could just kind of kick off, and then we'll obviously hear from the other speakers, but just a bit of detail about the journey that you've been on as a product designer. How did you arrive here, and what do you think the differentiators are, I suppose, in terms of title and hiring?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So, I mean, I started out in the graphic design world. So I moved from agency to agency before going client side. So I ended up at Vodafone as a UX design lead. And at Vodafone, we had a really clear split, between UX designers and UI designers. Then I kind of transitioned over to Bumble, where there was that really kind of traditional tech model, of product designers, product managers, and engineers. So it's a very different experience. Vodafone, much more corporate, way more of a split, handing things over, from UX design to UI design, whereas at Bumble, much more traditional. And I guess I thought it would be nice, before going into more details, it'd be great to hear from Omar and Perri, maybe to ground us in what their kind of situations are at their organizations, because I think it would be a nice place to kick off the conversation, so we all have a broad sense of the structure in all of our companies, and then we can maybe start the conversation from there.
Great idea.
I think it would be good.
Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. So I have worked across different industries, and it does differ, I find, kind of title and structure within those companies. I started out in Robert Dyer's, so many years ago, very different to where I'm working now, within a sports agency. I've worked in the beauty industry, luxury, fashion, and every place that I've worked, they have had a different setup. strangely enough, I've not worked anywhere with a product design team, which I'm sure is very different to Ollie and Omar. But as we'll talk through this, you'll see that the UX product design roles are very, very similar. So it'll be interesting to see kind of the setups on each. But at the moment, I have a team of UX designers, and it's only probably within my last 3 roles, which date back to Space NK, which I loved. I love the beauty industry. That's where Yas placed me, so we go way back. Hackett and Fraser's Group, which is the Mike Ashley empire, which lots of you have probably heard of. But yeah, a lot of those kind of were based around UX teams rather than product design. So yeah, very different experience on my end. But I think that varies across industries.
Thanks,
What are
Perri.
your thoughts, Omar?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I mean, it's great to kind of hear all the kind of different setups and different teams and different organizations. I think for me, my journey, you know, having worked primarily in e-commerce, that kind of brand, I do admit I did a couple of weeks at an agency, which is not on my LinkedIn. I just didn't like it, so I don't keep it. I was always a kind of in-house person. But yeah, I mean, I've headed up design teams within the kind of electrical retail space, from, you know, working at Comet down to like in travel. So I was at lastminute.com for a number of years in a very kind of tech service product setup where everything's kind of ingrained. And then now I'm in kind of like fashion, you know, one of the main fashion houses in the UK. And here, obviously, creativity and fashion is linked to the product is different. The product is a real product. It's not a digital product. So as a product designer, we call ourselves digital product designers internally because there are real product designers in the business. But us, I mean, the setup we have in the team right now, from probably 5 years ago, it was separate UX and UI, but then there was the birth of kind of product mindset within the company. And we kind of quickly evolved to a model where we have different roles and different disciplines within the team, from UX all the way to product. And we need both. And I'll explain as we kind of go on through the conversation, but we were set up in like the why, the what and the how, the why being the UX, the what being the product, which is the bulk of the people, and the how being the design ops. And that's how we kind of set ourselves out. But yeah, for me, it just varies based on your organization. It's not about kind of fitting into one world or another.
I think there's also like clear differences between title or just the name of the role, and then also the responsibilities that the company is looking for. Because I've witnessed companies that label the role, for example, UX designer, but what they actually want is more a traditional kind of product designer, which is both ends of the spectrum, UI and UX, versus some companies that call it UX designer, but they are specifically only looking for like the UX side of the responsibilities. So I do think there's a clear differentiation between the title itself and what's required. And I think sometimes that comes down to maturity of the organization as well, and their leveling frameworks and things like that, and how they make clear what they're looking for. I don't know if you've both found the same.
I also think that it comes down to a budget thing sometimes. So you tend to see the product design roles are in that higher wage bracket. So depending on what the organisation is looking for, sometimes rightly or wrongly so, they'll try to encapsulate many more responsibilities within a role for a UX designer, but actually covers a product design role. And I do think sometimes it's a cost-cutting exercise.
Yeah, I think we have.
Point.
Sorry.
No,
I was going to say we have both ends of the spectrum as well. The budget thing's definitely right, Perri. It's like, you know, we're going through a bit of a kind of like crisis at the moment. So how many things can you squeeze into a role to get the most out of a person? That's definitely true. I think the other thing for us is like internally, to kind of Ollie's point, what are your kind of structures and your frameworks? What do you produce as a team? Because there's a title and then the skill, not the skill, but the activities that you do. Which activities do you carry out the most in your role within the organization? And where does that kind of activity lie? Like for me, the word why we transitioned from UX UI to product and we still kept UX was because you're now working in a product mindset. So because you work in a product mindset, you are a product designer, because by definition, that's what's kind of driving it. The word product is the value you're adding through a product framework. Whilst if you're not working in a product mindset, then to me, it's not really a product designer. You are doing kind of, you're agnostic of that environment. So there's a little bit of how that's the reason why we transitioned into that space as well. But for me, I've kept all three types of roles for that specific reason. But I guess I've just been lucky. But it was a hard slog to get to that and convince people within the HR teams, within the different orgs, that we need these different skills.
Yeah. And do you think as hiring managers, I guess we can agree that in different organizations, people call things different things, and it comes down to budget or what you're trying to how much bang for your buck you're trying to get maybe in terms of talent attraction. But do you think when you're hiring, does someone's title influence or affect your view of them or their career, their skill set? How do you delve into it? Because, for example, I've spoken to UX UI designers who essentially are the product designer in their organization. They've just never been, given that title officially, but they would feel reticent to put themselves forward for a product design role because they're not entirely sure if they've got that kind of string to their bow. And I'm trying to it's a big education piece, I suppose. And I'm just interested to see from a hiring standpoint, how do you disseminate? How do you figure out if someone has done that kind of more helicopter view, the product side, versus just being really solid on both UX and UI?
It doesn't affect, sorry, Omar. It doesn't affect my hiring process, the title necessarily, just because you see more and more people kind of market themselves as a UX/product designer. And I think it comes from kind of confusion about what the roles and responsibilities entail. And that is, as we've said, kind of it differs between organisations, but also the understanding of what each role covers. So quite often when you interview someone, they're not necessarily what they say they are, and not meaning that in a bad way, but it's quite confusing because the lines are blurred. I'm more interested in where they've worked, because as we've said, I'll use Ollie as an example. Before everybody joined the call, I mentioned I have no experience in your industry. Very, very different from kind of luxury fashion, which I'm used to. So somebody who has worked on your team versus, a huge Frasers company is just going to have such varied experience and different responsibilities within that role. They could both be product designers, but it's more where they've worked and what they've taken care of that I look at as opposed to title.
Which is reassuring.
I think it goes back, I think, as well to the title versus responsibilities thing, because it's very easy to say, I've known people to change their CV, right, depending on what role they're going for, right? If they're going for a role at Bumble, they might say, I'm a product designer. If they're going for a role at Burberry or Legends, they might say, I'm a UX designer or I'm a UI designer or something a bit more clear cut. But actually their skill sets may be in one specific area. And I agree with Perri that it also comes down to experience and where they've worked previously. That's what I look for anyway as a hiring manager, is where have they worked? And I think you can only get that from speaking to them or through people like yourself, Yasmin, speaking to the candidate beforehand and relaying that to the hiring manager. I think it can be really difficult because it's very easy to put anything onto a CV, right? And to change your title and say you're one thing when actually formally on your contract it says something else. So I think really it comes down to experience and responsibilities and skill set ultimately.
Yeah, I think the other thing as kind of a hiring manager, and I think the Perri and Ollie touched on, is the experience matters. And again, ultimately, the onus is still down to the hiring manager to make sure that you do due diligence and speak to the candidates and understand what they've done in these spaces, rather than just looking at the title, because titles are interchangeable. But I think kind of describing within your previous experience around the types of people you worked with, the frameworks you've worked within, because it helps the hiring manager understand what are your normal day-to-day challenges and who what is it kind of like, who do you spend the most time with? It's like, do you spend most time with a product manager and an engineer? And then you are going to be working in a very traditional product setup. And if you call yourself a UX designer, it helps the hiring manager understand, okay, it's not the title, it's what they've done. That's the experience and that's who they spend their time with. Whilst if you describe your role and your experiences, it's a very kind of like traditional, somebody else does the wireframing, very old school, I'm thinking now here, and then somebody else adds the kind of UI, then okay, they're not working in that. So when I hire them, I'm going to have to take them on this learning curve and education to get them up to speed in that skill set. And then that's ultimately like the hiring manager's looking at is what's the level of investment as well they need to make in that candidate to get them, framed and working around your internal kind of challenges. So I think that does matter, like highlighting those experiences, and I think that's where title kind of just goes out the window a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I have been known to tell people, you know, that they're kind of worried to change their LinkedIn profile to a certain title. And I'm of the mindset, I'm one person. I think you should be marketing yourself as the product that you are. I think you should be saying, you know, this is my skill set. This is the benefit of my experience you'd be getting. It doesn't matter if you're in, you know, there's still people called senior graphic designer, and they're essentially a really deep dive UX UI designer, but their internal titles just don't do justice to that. And I think the system's a bit broken, and making sure that you confidently assert where your skills best lie. I think that's kind of, everyone's discretion to kind of really assert that to hiring managers and processes, just to be clear. Last bit, just on kind of titles and skill sets, I suppose, this whole debate that I have on a weekly basis with clients, where they say they want a product designer who's as strong on UX as they are on UI, and someone who can do it all, like that you know, the dreaded unicorn. I say dreaded because when I get that brief, I want the ground to swallow me up. But, you know, in my opinion, invariably, someone's skill set's always going to go one way or the other, slightly more, even if they have been overseeing things from a more product standpoint. What's your view? Do you think anyone can ever be it all and do it all, or will they always be slightly stronger in one area than the other?
I think you can be good at everything and be great at everything. Again, it just comes back to that skill tree, I guess. And one thing I was going to say on the previous topic, I think it's still relevant for this, is, you know, even at Bumble, even though we classify as product design, no team, in my view, should have everyone on sort of like equal skill sets. You always want someone who is maybe over-indexing on visual design and someone who is over-indexing on interaction design, because it gets the best out of the team, I think. There's definitely a baseline. So for us, for example, at the senior level of a product designer, there is basic level expectations we have for visual design, interaction design, product thinking, for example, but some people will weigh heavier or lighter on those aspects. And I think that is key, like to build a strong team, is you lean on some people's skills over others, and that's where everyone supports each other as well, rather than having everyone who is just at exactly the same level. I think you get the best out of people when you have a little bit of a differentiation.
Yeah. And I think that you have people do exist that, you know, have experience in all of them. In my experience, you usually have somebody who tips, you know, more UI than UX. So naturally, you're going to be more skilled in one area. But I think people are kind of teaching themselves to experience all areas because of titles like product designer. You know, they want to experience everything before they kind of decide which route they go down, because these roles are requiring more and more from candidates. So yeah, I think they can have experience, but not necessarily excel in every single area, as Ollie just said.
Makes sense. I think we should move on to our next topic. Kind of tools, tech, trends in design, albeit this is going to be a snapshot. Perri, maybe you can kind of kick us off, but kind of shed some light on some of the key trends and priorities for digital designers, and as that relates to skill sets and tools, and where should they be appropriating their time in 2024?
So trends is something, I mean, trends are often subjective, so I tend to not look at trends necessarily, but things that are definitely kind of coming down the road and that we should be focusing on. Starting with tools, from my perspective, I mean, it's inevitable. SaaS platforms, so software as a service, you know, cloud computing these days is a crucial skill that I look for when recruiting for any creative role. So tools like Figma you see on most people's CVs, Webflow, they just kind of enable us to be kind of more well-rounded, holistic designers, because of what they allow us to do. It's different from when I started out. We no longer have to use 8, 9, 10 different Adobe Creative Suite programs, you know, Photoshop, Illustrator, XD, RIP XD. I was quite a fan of XD. But the kind of Figma encapsulates like the whole, well, most of what we need as an entire package. So tools like that are really helpful for designers. It kind of covers design element. Obviously, you've got the kind of prototyping, we know they're rapidly enhancing the dev mode, which kind of bridges that gap between creative and technical. And then even like FigJam, which kind of, again, talks more to the product side, the product management of kind of the brainstorming, research, and that collaborative tool. So that, I mean, Figma is just one example, but those are the sorts of skills that I look for when recruiting for my team today. I don't know if you guys agree.
I'm going to say something really controversial, Perri. I don't like Figma, not because it's not a good tool. I think currently there's this danger in the design industry. There's so much, everyone's so fixated. It's like iPhone, Android. It's like fanboy club around Figma. I get it. It's great marketing. I have somebody that used to work in my team that went to work for Figma, not because of that, and they stole it from me. But I think it's more, people are focused so much on the tool now and not the problem we're trying to solve. Like for me, my view is like, it should be tool agnostic, because for me, it's more, I want to try and shift my team into design less, build more. So like prototype more. Like, where do you want to spend your time solving the problem? Do you want to spend it in flat design, ideation? Do you want to spend it in prototyping so you can validate the idea works? Obviously, it's not a blanket rule for every problem you're trying to solve. You still need to go through the due diligence and the research and the insights. But that's where I'm trying to make the biggest shift, is spend more time building. And I think the introduction, you mentioned kind of Webflow, Frame, all these kind of like low-code tools are coming in. We just try different things. We just go, right, get a trial version, try it, see how it works. And I think this kind of overthinking of like the software is the problem solver, when the software is a means to an end and not the end. And that's where I'm kind of coming about when I say controversial, but it's not that controversial, but you know what I mean? This kind of fanboy club around Figma all the time, selling themselves as a design system solution. But yeah.
I'll fight you, Omar. I'm the opposite end. I mean, I love it, but again, I think it comes down to requirements from the business as well, right? Like, we operate on a very speed. Speed is our number one metric, I guess, that we operate under, because I guess like all of us, we have fierce competition, but when we're trying to deliver a product, an app that is constantly updating, constantly serving the needs of the customer, like speed is focus. So Figma provides us all of that, because I mean, also our entire design system is built through Figma, so like everything just clicks and everything kind of works. So for us, it works really well. But I also agree on the prototyping, like what's going to get you to that speed quicker for us. Like if people have more experience prototyping in other software, like I'm not opposed to anything like that. I think for us, it just comes down to what's going to get us from the problem to the solution in the quickest time, most effectively, I guess. And for us right now, Figma serves that purpose. But I also agree there is a big sort of fanboy thing around Figma. It's the hot brand right now. I don't think any brand or company in this space has really done what they have done to be thought as almost as like in the same vein as like an Apple or a company in similar approach, and they've done really well to get to that point. So it would take a lot for someone to knock them off that pedestal, I think, because so many companies now use it. It happened with Sketch, but yeah, I don't know, they have the monopoly now.
I was going to say it's the new Sketch.
I'm starting to see quite a few people create their portfolios in Figma and sharing it that way, which is really cool, I suppose, in terms of demonstrating your ability to use said tool, as it is, unfortunately, Omar, I don't think going anywhere anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, what's your I mean, that's a slight segue, but in terms of, this is a recruitment audience, so in terms of showcasing your skill and experience with different tools and tech, is there a certain way you prefer portfolios presented, or are you kind of agnostic? Does it not really matter?
I have quite strong views on this, because I mean, I came from the graphic design background, right, where there's always so much talk around present your portfolio in the best possible way, even to the days of like a physical portfolio that you would take to interview at companies, and it had to be perfect, right? This beautiful artifact. I think now, especially, I'd be interested to what the other two think, but like as a hiring manager, again, like my time is so limited. So often I get hundreds of candidates thrown at me, either going into it myself and looking through it, or someone from recruitment sending me those candidates and picking them out, and I have such limited time that really, like, whatever the medium is, I don't really mind as long as I get what I need to get from it, which is like, do they understand problem space? Do they understand that process from beginning to end? Are they sufficient in the skill sets that we're looking for? So whether it's in Figma, on a website, a PDF, whatever it may be, I'm not too worried about it, but interested what the other two think.
I totally agree with the caveat of PDFs, and it's probably a time-saving exercise, but when I get a candidate that sends me 4 or 5 PDFs of different projects, it's not the most effective way to review somebody's work. For me, as Ollie said, you know, Figma, prototype link, website, there's many ways to do it, but personally, downloading PDFs and having to kind of sift through it and work out what each project means is not my favorite way of doing it.
Yeah, I found, give you an example of which type of portfolios that kind of worked for me. I think what Ollie and Perri said is exactly what I would say in the same way. It's more work in a form of communication, or whatever you can do to communicate your experience and your, you know, expertise, use that. But a good example of like somebody applying for an e-commerce job within the checkout space at Burberry, and the checkout product team, they ran a user test, spent their own money. I mean, it was £20 or something. They ran a user test, and then from that user test, they were able to demonstrate their skill set far beyond what they could do by taking a project they'd done and copy and pasting a design thinking, you know, don't even get me started with design thinking, but, you know, taking that whole thing and just putting it on a 20-page kind of portfolio document, which I was never going to read. But instead, they just ran a user test with 5 candidates, quick video insight, and they just drew hypotheses from that, what they would do, and just followed a process they would apply through a design task as a product designer. And that in itself was enough for me to go, that's the type of candidate on the skill set that I kind of need, rather than a copy and paste of a project, which could have been a collaborative piece with 10 other people they would have worked on with. So that was a much better way of executing a kind of portfolio in my kind of eyes, and it was just different than just reading a link on a website somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. And I've also never liked you see a lot of portfolios that follow the kind of the typical double diamond style approach of like, here was the user problem, here was like we did user research, and then we move forward into concept. Like, it's never like that.
Never happens in a company.
It never happens. Like, every project is different. The double diamond is great in some way as a sort of rough framework, but, you know, context gets in the way 95% of the time, and it's not as linear as that. So I think you can always see that from a portfolio as well, when someone has tried to follow to the book, like what the process is, and you can kind of see through it that it's like, I would be very surprised if that was the actual process. So I like transparency. I like, you know, here were the problems we came up against within this initiative or project, whatever is being shown. And I also think length is something as well. Like, I've seen portfolios that can really go into like a very wordy, very lengthy, going into every single step and every single stage of the project. And I don't think as well, for hiring managers who are very limited on time, that's the best way. I think it's all about like getting to the key points, as Omar said, of the presentation, on whether it's a presentation in person or whether it's an actual portfolio you're sending. I think it's getting to the key points and what was your role in that initiative and project as well.
I love hearing you say that, Ollie. That is like my the drum I bang all the time. CVs and portfolios, not what did you do, what was the impact of what you did, what was your achievement, how did that impact the bottom line of the business? I want to hear about that quick fire. I don't want to have to wade through a job description. It is so much more exciting to hear about the impact and the effect of your skills on that business than what you did in real time. So yeah, I approve massively of that.
Just quickly on that can be a challenge though, you know, like especially in this kind of triad model that we operate under product teams. You know, we have product teams at Bumble. Some people work on larger problems, some people work on smaller problems, and it's not always possible to show specifically, like directly, the impact that you've had on bottom line, right, on company revenue. So I think if you can, that's incredible and that's great. But sometimes we go back to levels, like levels can play a part in that. Maybe a kind of lead or staff level product designer is working on a team that has very high visibility, very high impact on something like revenue and bottom line, whereas maybe a designer earlier in their career is working on a problem that is maybe more about saving the company money than making the company money, right? So I think it depends, but definitely agree, impact 100%, but that can be both bottom line impact for the company, but also
Sure.
What other kind of impact are you having, whether it's on, like I said, saving money or operations, design system, right? How are you saving the company money, or how are you impacting the team, for example? But 100% agree, impact is key. And
one last point I'd make on that is, for me, quality over quantity. So we just said about kind of the length of the projects displayed. Sometimes somebody might be starting out, or they might have only worked for a startup, and they might not have the big impact projects to showcase. So innovation, in the way Omar just explained, that somebody's taken it upon themselves to pay £20 for a user test, maybe on a project they haven't actually taken part in, but created a case study of something they, their potential of what they could bring to a business. So it doesn't always have to be what they have done, but maybe what they could do and what they could bring to the table.
Yeah, it's a good point, that, because as a hiring manager, like, there's two ways I can look at it. Is there potential in this candidate versus somebody who's got experience? And sometimes it's not experience that's one, it's just potential that you want. And somebody, has that initiative to show potential, you're more willing to go, okay, I'm going to invest in this person because they feel that I'm going to get more out of this candidate. And yeah, 100%. There's always that potential versus experience question.
A slight segue, because this was one of the topics we wanted to touch on, and I know you've all got your own thoughts around this, but before we move on to the big talking point of AI, there's already some questions popping up in the chat about that. But accessibility in design, this is a huge kind of talking point, and we're only going to be able to lift the lid on it. But I suppose, if your business isn't prioritizing that, or, what could you do to make a difference? Is there any kind of tools, training? I know you've all got your own individual experiences, but it seems like it's a subject matter that's not going anywhere.
So for me, it shouldn't be listed as a skill, accessible design and experience in that, but it's something that I look for because not everybody has experience or is aware of it on the scale that we should be. I work for an international company at the moment, which is predominantly based in the US, which is non-negotiable out there. There's lawsuits galore for people who do not comply. And we work with the ADA compliance, which is Americans with Disabilities Act. The equivalent here would be the WCAG guidelines. But if a company is not, kind of taking it as serious as they should, or kind of, getting on board with those standards, I would say it's an educational piece. Training around the requirements, we're lucky enough at Legends to have a web accessibility specialist who regularly trains and kind of gatekeeps those standards. But some of these issues that we're facing, they're not, they're quick fixes. We're not talking hiring entire teams of kind of specialists to sort these problems out. A lot of them are so basic that I think if we strip it back to figures and kind of data for organisations, for stakeholders to understand the impact that we're having, it might get people listening. So when you think about, I was reading an article the other day, I think a quarter of people are registered disabled in the UK. Now that equates to like 17 million people or something along those lines. So we're talking visual impairment, hearing, cognitive load. And by not complying with the guidelines, we're not only hindering their experiences, sometimes we're fully stopping them being able to use our products. And then when you break that down into potential users that you're driving away from your sites and the figures that, the revenue that we could be losing, I'm sure organisations would take notice of those sorts of stats. But for me, it's an educational piece because I just don't think people realise the amount of, as I said, the amount of users that are just kind of pushed away from websites if they're not compliant. And as I said, the quick fixes can come down to color contrast, text color versus background color and sufficient contrast there. Input fields with correct labeling so that screen readers can, they're compatible. And we live in such a digital world where things are not available as they used to be. So some things we're forced to do, like a doctor's appointment. Sometimes they're purely on, online now. Doesn't matter what age you are, you could be 70 and not used a computer before, but you have to book your doctor's appointment online. Now, if somebody's got a visual impairment and that site is not compliant, they may not physically be able to do that. So it's all those sorts of hindrances that we need to kind of iron out and address. And I just think if we don't have people applying for these roles that are mindful of this or have experience in it, kind of makes me fearful for the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's somebody on the chat said it's a basic design principle to have, that skill set, especially in current times, like you mentioned, Perri. Like, having access to the internet is almost like oxygen for we can't even put our phones down now without step on an hour away from our phone. So I think it's critical. I think one of the kind of challenges, I mean, speaking from my experiences, when I first started at Burberry, it wasn't a thing because everyone had this as a myth. You do a lot of your job is like you said, education. It's like myth busting. You spend so much time building facts and data. Just the myth bust. You go into a meeting, go, oh, rich people don't care about stuff like that, or people are interested in fashion like the way they look. So why would they? Not just assuming all people who have disabilities are blind. There are other aspects as well. So that was a huge kind of learning curve to introduce within the organization. But the second part was like, obviously there are the legal challenges, but it was more about where I kind of got people to listen in, especially people who are of influence and decision making at the top end of the suite, was more around missed business opportunity. Like you mentioned, Perri, I was able to work with an organization where they were able to explain the size of I guess in billions, what the opportunity is out there for people who are, often people think of the more, visual impairments and things that you can kind of explicitly see somebody has a disability, but there's other aspects of this, dyslexia and things like that. You can't just see that in front of somebody. It's like, I was trying to explain this to the organization, and then when people started explaining, okay, do you know David Beckham is declared dyslexic? Do you know X person is? So Richard Branson and stuff like that. And they go, oh, crap. These people have a lot of money and they're our clients as well. Then it starts to kind of, you have to find a story that connects your business to that. And often that's I find storytelling as another thing. As a designer, storytelling, you have to do great storytelling. And that storytelling is the way we manage to kind of get it over the line. And now it's, rather than being, something reactive, it's now proactive, which I never thought would ever be a fashion brand. And, we were only able to do that because we got people to think about the money. Ching, ching. So if that's the way you do it, then you have to just find the kind of angle you have to get it, to become important for the business.
And that's
100% agree. I think, and also the pool is much greater than that of people with even a shout out for temporary or situational disabilities, right? Like a parent carrying their child, holding a cup of coffee. I know that sounds minor compared to actual, physical disabilities and things like that. But when you consider that as part of accessibility, the pool for businesses is much, much, much greater, right? How can I, if I'm holding my child in my left hand and I'm left-handed and I'm using my product experience now with my right hand, I'm situationally disabled in some way, right? So I can't do things in the same way that I would have before, maybe can't access the same buttons in the right way. I get flustered, I close the product down, so like this is also a very eye-opening thing, and was eye-opening for me when I started to look into this way back in my career as well, is to help businesses understand that there's two ends of the spectrum.
And it's,
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I think it's opening people's eyes, because we're talking about a digital world and how we kind of factor in accessibility there. But as Ollie just mentioned, if you kind of just look at it from a day-to-day perspective, and I know that as you mentioned, kind of temporary disability or, situational, as, when I first became a mum, trying to navigate some train stations where they don't have lifts, and you have anybody who's had a child knows that from 6 to 12 months, those newborn prams are massive. You can't get through some doorways, like those sorts of things that just hinder everybody's day-to-day life of navigating around a place or a product. if we consider that in our everyday life, why don't we consider it online? You know, and it just isn't given the same level of consideration in some respects. So yeah, kind of just expanding people's, I guess, mindset in that way.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a kind of like, there's a lot of questions I could see on the chat about AI. What could you use AI for? And this is definitely one great place to like think about it. Like, you know, there are lots of resources out there. I think there's some best in class places like Microsoft. Microsoft are for me one of the leaders in the space, especially AI drives innovation. If you think about the person who invented cruise control in a car, that was based on a guy who had a chauffeur. I think he was blind, I think he was, or he wanted to go. So he invented cruise control in a car, then the electric toothbrush, then Audible, all these things, they come from solving accessibility needs, and it drives innovation. I think AI is another space, another paradigm that can help, you know, where you don't have that conventional wisdom and knowledge of how to solve something, which is not as obvious. You can use AI to kind of help, you know, solve some of those challenges for you already where you don't have the time and the effort. And often it just comes down to business focus and cost. Accessibility is also a very expensive topic, both on the side of lawsuits on one side, but on the other side of actually, you know, investing in it, training, tooling, you know, getting screen readers. And, you know, it's not just designers, engineers, product managers, everybody has to contribute towards accessibility. It, you know, the engineering side is another minefield. Given I have some experience in coding in my early days, I can just have empathy towards those guys. It is very tough, that side of the job as well. So, you know, there is so much to learn in this space yet. But I see accessibility as more also a room for innovation. I think innovation is what's going to kind of be the next step we can take.
I think if you're a designer that doesn't have experience in it or kind of doesn't know where to start with it, because there's tons of research you can do. I would say just start at base level, maybe kind of by creating a design system. So it can be a really basic version. It could be, you know, you're building a portfolio to get your work out there, the very first step. But if you start to build a design system and put all of those elements that you research into practice, you're essentially building the kind of scaffolding, because for larger e-com sites, design systems are how we scale efficiently, and kind of so prioritizing accessibility at that baseline kind of gives you that first step that you need to take. So I think that would be a good starting point if people are kind of looking to understand it a little bit more.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Omar, you kind of segued very seamlessly there into the kind of final subject matter. I think I'm just going to let you take the floor because, let's be honest, you guys are the expert, not me. But yeah, AI in design, friend, foe, how does it fit in? There's lots of questions coming through on the chat regarding AI. I'm just going to outline a couple of them. I know I said I'd do them at the end, but I just feel like this might help feed this conversation a little bit. Something about speed as a focus. Ollie, you mentioned that. How does AI come into the conversation when you're thinking about that? Speed and ease, I would say as well. You know, I've heard of lots of people using ChatGPT to help kind of create their case studies more time effectively, you know, and help them with the copywriting side of their portfolio, you know. So there's lots of conversation around that. But yeah, just to kind of how you see that increasing our capability in design.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think the thing is, the way I kind of look at it is, it's not foe, it's definitely friend. You almost essentially the way for me, I mean, we have an entire team internally that's set up around this. It's a multidisciplinary team from engineers, designers, product managers, even the physical creative product people around how can AI solve problems behind the scenes before it's I think that's where the biggest curve is. If people see AI front and center, there's this kind of natural kind of barrier to a computer doing something. But if you're solving problems that are behind the scenes, to your point, efficiency, streamlining things, workflows, you know, where, you know, you can improve human error, things like that, like copy translation, things like that. That's where I think AI can start to kind of become a little bit more of a friend rather than foe. Is this question of like, will AI take our jobs? Potentially. But if you think of it like that, then you're always going to come at it from like a glass half full point of view.
They're not taking my job. They're not taking my job.
Yeah, but it's kind of like this is. I'll give you an example where the team have been using Framer a lot to build prototypes, and Framer launched their beta version from about 4 or 5 months ago. where you can build a website based on a prompt. So just like you guys understand, you know, generative AI, it's based on kind of prompts. I created a prompt. I was just building a quick prototype for something. I just wrote in, build me a Burberry website that sells luxury spectacles. And within 1 minute and 30 seconds, it designed and coded and prototyped for me a website. Obviously, some of the generative stuff was a bit far-fetched, but it's very easy to replace that stuff. Or another example is A/B testing. So we often take the time to test and research the same things over and over again, like what's the right color of a button for an outer bag? Oh my God, the number of times that's been discussed out there in the world. AI can solve that for you because it knows how many times that's been done with confidence. So it's there to solve those types of problems for you that are more obvious, which require human intervention, and it takes time, leaving you the time to focus on the bigger problems where you can add innovation and improve things. And that's how I see how AI can embed in the early days of, you know, your day-to-day life as a designer. So yeah, I think AI, embrace it, you know. It's not
100%. I think Doug touched on it in the chat as well. Like, that's the way I look at it. Right now, currently, it gets you 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% of the way there, but there's still a lot to be done in that final kind of 20, 30%, right? And I agree with Omar. It's great from a task point of view. You know, if you're trying to structure a document or structure an argument or something, maybe it can kick you off in the right direction, and it can give you a lot of great insights that you maybe would have taken you half a day to get to if you were just thinking it up on your own, right? But it's still that final part that is where the innovation, differentiation, uniqueness comes into it. And I don't think we'll ever lose that in some way. I think it will just be different, but we're still very early. I mean, for us, yes, it speeds up some processes. We're yet to like dive too deep into it. There's also a lot of legal watch outs in AI, especially for a public company like us, that we have to be careful of. That we can't just like dive straight into it. There's lots of hoops to jump through and things like that to make sure it's okay. But yeah, we're very early, but it definitely, I see it the same way that it was framed in the chat there, that it's for now, I see it as it speeds up processes at that kind of beginning stage. You know, I don't think we're far off. You being able to feed something into a system that says like, design me a screen based on this design system and use these components and create a flow for me. But will it have like product thinking? Will it know all of our data and insights from previous experiments that we've run, that we know our users prefer this over that? Like, perhaps not yet. One day, yes, but for sure, speed and process workflows it can be great for. So I would say friend as well.
I think friend, and for the reasons you guys have given, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think where we see job descriptions requiring more from people now, efficiency and time saving is key with AI. You know, it's going to allow people to do more in a less time, because requiring so much manually from people is unrealistic. I do think it has a long way to go, but I think my worry with leaning on it too much, especially for people starting out, is I guess the deficit in knowledge and skill set that it will cause. I mean, I trained as a designer. I learned from teams around me, kind of put all different areas of design into practice, as you guys, I'm sure, did. And, you know, that allowed me to upskill and kind of ultimately get to where I am today. But you don't need to do that anymore. You know, you could, as Omar just explained, you can literally put a prompt into a machine and design, build, prototype, which is amazing. But in the gaps that AI does leave, because it isn't where it needs to be yet, how do you fill those gaps without the knowledge to fall back on? So my worry is that it will breed a generation of laziness, which is controversial, but, you know, friend, but with caution, is my take on it for now.
I think that's probably wise to approach with caution. I mean, a couple of questions in terms of how do you expect or hope to see candidates demonstrate their experience in incorporating big idea AI capabilities into their designs? Like, is that something you're looking out for? I mean, there's a question in the chat just come up about for you, Ollie, kind of using AI and ways of working is one thing, but what about actually implementing AI solutions into your designs?
Yeah, so I mean, like, unfortunately, I can't go into any specific details about things we're looking into for AI, but I mean, I will say that no, in response to like, am I looking for specific candidates that have demonstrated that in the past? Like, no, not yet. I think we're too soon to start looking for that, or for me personally, to start looking into that as a skill set and someone who has worked in that space before, because still we're so early. But you know, obviously everyone is looking into AI at the moment, and I think in different industries it can be good for different things. But yes, something we're definitely looking into for sure. But I wouldn't say it's something specifically I'm looking at as a skill set versus other companies, you know, that are in that space heavily, where I'm sure it definitely is something that they are looking for and looking at.
I mean, I think we could probably go on for hours. There's so much to kind of unpack with regards to AI, and I think Perri and you and I have had a discussion about this. I know, in terms of, you know, the whole backbone of user experience is empathy and understanding your user, which is kind of where I'm confident the computers aren't coming for my job just yet. I think if you're lacking that in recruitment as well, you're slightly lost. So I think we're all right for the next few years, but I think it's interesting to see how it can help us and not hinder us, and how it can therefore be our friend and not our foe. But there's always going to be a kind of human intellect and emotional intelligence, I think, that needs to be incorporated in all aspects of our life. So yeah, not too worried just yet. If I may, I've got a few questions here. Maybe we just do kind of quick fire. I'm conscious of time. We're kind of nearing the hour mark. So if it's all right, I'll just kind of fire these out, and whoever feels it might be most relevant to answer. Some of them a little bit more recruitment and kind of career focused. An interesting one from a very dear friend. Do you think the future of the industry is to specialize more and more, or do you think there is a place for generalists who cover UX, UI, product, digital design, print? What are your thoughts?
We were talking about this like a while ago, weren't we, about this this new term that we're hearing in the industry called growth designer. I mean, it's actually been around for a long time, but hearing about it more and more, and I think Omar touched on the kind of cost-cutting exercise that a lot of companies are doing. You know, when we had specialists, then we went to product design, where it was both UX and UI and visual design, interaction design. And I'm hearing a lot more and more about this thing of growth design, which is, I mean, different companies look at it in different way, but the TLDR is it's almost an in-between of a product manager and a product designer. That is something I do think will happen over time. You know, my opinion is that the lines between product manager and product designer will start to become more and more blurred, specifically in my kind of industry, I believe. So yes, like I don't know if that answers the question specifically, but for specifically my industry, I think less and less specialists, more generalists is the way I see it going.
Yeah, I think I see it as it's like a vicious cycle, and it's just how long that cycle lasts, and it's all down to kind of like what the macro out there is, in the sense of like, you know, at the moment we're going through a bit of a, I like to believe it's because of, you know, cost and stuff, where people are just trying to get the most bang for their buck. So they're trying to create roles that where you do lots of stuff. And I think it's rightly so sometimes, because when you actually look inside your company and you realize there's so many overlaps. You know, there are overlaps between a product manager and a UX designer. There are overlaps between, you know, a UX designer and a product designer, or there's overlaps between sometimes between even a business analyst and a UX designer sometimes when it comes to like, you know, the requirements and how a feature works and stuff. So when people do these types of introspective and they go, these overlaps exist, they go, oh, 30% of that role both teams are doing, well, what's going on here? And then that's what kind of kicks off this wave sometimes. And then you start to kind of find these roles kind of come out. But I agree with kind of Ollie. I think these roles have always been there. It's just what you've called them. It goes in waves, and how that role bloats and then goes down to a specialism. It's also down to the company. You know, I will push hard to keep these 3 specialists we have in our team, because I've created enough of a separation between the roles to warrant that. But eventually, if somebody came in, like, I don't know, hate consultants, but if consultants company came in like McKinsey or BCG, they went, hold on. But yeah, it would happen. It's just, yeah, you just can't get away from it.
Go ahead, Perri.
Agree. I mean, I think roles kind of are moving more towards like general, you know, kind of the general side of things. But I would say don't be scared to specialise. There are elements of my role that I enjoy much more than other bits of the role. And you know, sometimes you're naturally gifted in one area. So I'd say just if you're going for a role, just be transparent around your skills and what you have done. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the start. You know, don't try to be too much and what you're not. Like, you know, if you've got skills in an area, sell yourself as that. So yeah, general roles I think will become a thing, and you know they're not harmful because you will learn an awful lot along the way, but I wouldn't be scared to specialise.
I agree. Very quick question maybe to round off. I'm really sorry, there's so many questions and I'm very conscious that some people's rooms are only booked till 1:30. Thoughts on giving candidates design tasks? This has been a hot topic for debate. I know there's two sides to the coin and I kind of sit firmly between both camps. I just want everyone to be happy. I'm a people pleaser, but yeah, yes or no, is it necessary, and how much time do you think people should be having to appropriate to this?
It's something I have done in the past. Sometimes a business requires it, you know, for any number of reasons. But one, I would say if you're going to give them a design task, be fair and realistic. People have day-to-day jobs already. You know, some people have a lack of experience and don't know how to approach it. So they're quite intimidating. I would, and what I tend to do nowadays is lean more towards having them analyse part of our site or an offering that we have and see what they could bring to the table, you know, audits of the sites that we're currently doing, you know, like not necessarily here is a website that we might be redesigning, can you go and design it? Because we all know that there's very grey areas where, you know, work can be taken and the person's not hired. Like it's very controversial, but I just think a more relevant kind of task or take in their mind of what they could bring to your company and how they can improve your offering, I think is more of a fair way to hire someone.
Yeah, I agree. I think I saw Ollie put his thumbs down and they're not a fan of it either, having had to do it in the past because somebody asks you to do it. You know, yeah, somebody's just there to kind of you create ideas so they can steal your ideas basically and then put them into their product roadmap. I think a better kind of way to look at it is more than a task. It's more of a kind of like presentation around selling yourself, you know, your kind of your behaviors, you know, how you'll fit into the team, things like that. Something which is almost like more of a character representation rather than a task of a specific subject. Because all those answers can come out in the interview. Like, how did you do this? How do you explain this? You know, describe to me, you know, the types of, you know, the activities you had to run through. And that's what the interview's for. When somebody goes through and asks for you to spend like, God knows, an entire week on, like you said, Perri, redesigning a checkout flow on an e-commerce website. It's not, number one, it's not fair. And number two, if you know you clearly don't know what you're looking for in a candidate if you ask them to do all those things.
Yeah, and there was a question, we're not going to have time to go into all of them, I'm so sorry, but something about reviewing portfolios of juniors and how they should kind of get a leg up. And I think, you know, tasks can be really useful in that instance in terms of demonstrating or showcasing ability outside of what your existing body of work, because if you haven't had exposure to that, or, you know, it gives hiring managers and candidates an opportunity to show off a bit and kind of they can be really useful. But I also agree that, you know, it should be drilling into the detail and the how you got there, not just the finished product and then you don't get the job and suddenly that email design is going out a week later to the masses. Like that's extremely unfortunately common and disappointing. So I think there's a fine line.
Yeah, I think that on that junior point, I think when you don't have the experience to kind of share through a portfolio, or you know, you're not going to be able to kind of do a task, it's about using your initiative. I doubt there's kind of many hiring managers out there will overlook the initiative, like the example I showed where somebody did a user test or building your own kind of, it's at least there. It's not something that's prescribed. It's more you've used it because you've done that because you've actually wanted to do it. It's not because you've been told to do it. So that can often for junior designers kind of, you know, be a kind of a bit of an advantage sometimes. So yeah.
Absolutely. I've loved this conversation. It could go on for hours. Unfortunately, I don't think we're allowed to stay on for too much longer. And I'm sure everyone's got loads to be getting on with. But it's been an absolute honour today to have this chat with you all, hearing more about your experiences. I'm sure this is the first of many, and I am very grateful for all of you being a part of it today. Everyone who joined us from afar as well, greatly appreciated. And yeah, I hope the insights and the takeaways were useful. And we'll make sure you all get a recording of this, and we'll make sure we kind of wrap up with some key takeaways, and I'll keep you posted about events to come. But I'm wishing you all a really good rest of the week, and to the panel, Omar, Ollie, Perri, yeah, couldn't have done it without you, so thank you.
Thank you too.
Thanks,
Thank you for
everyone.
having us.
Thank you very much. Bye,
Have
everyone.
a great rest of the week.
Bye,
Get
everyone.
back to lunch now. Bye.
Yeah, go and have some lunch.